We do encounter, especially lately, lots of books and materials on the so-called near-death experiences. And I'm not going to catalog or get into those because they are, at best, doubtful sources of information on the subject that we're pursuing. There are some near-death experiences that are authenticated. There's one in Acts chapter 7, when young Stephen has given his presentation to the Sanhedrin. He gives the most august Jewish body of that time a lesson or a review of Old Testament history. And they interrupt him and have him stoned. And as he's stoned, in Acts chapter 7, verse 56, he sees Jesus Christ standing, waiting for him. So this idea that a Christian that dies is immediately greeted by the Lord himself on the other side of that portal is scriptural. Stephen's an example of that. Paul is another example. He talks about in 2 Corinthians 12 that there was an occasion 14 years earlier. He speaks of it in the third person, but clearly it's him caught up into what he calls the third heaven. That was a Greek term because that first heaven was considered the sky where the birds fly, the second heaven the stars. The third heaven is the heaven that you and I think of as heaven. And he was caught up there, only to hear things that could not be uttered. And it's interesting that he says it was 14 years earlier, and if you do your homework in Acts 14, it's that 14 years earlier he was at Lystra where he was stoned and left for dead. And scholars argue that it may have been a near-death experience or he actually may have been resurrected from the dead because they left him and thought he was dead. So whether he is or not, that's a scholastic debate, but clearly that may be what gave rise to Paul's experience that he records in 2 Corinthians 12. But as we go into any other sources than the Scripture, let's be on our guard because Satan's primary weapon is deception. And his agenda is to have you destroyed. That's his goal. And he has incredible resources to try to bring that about. And so he would like you to believe that there is no such thing as a judgment, that there is no real accountability to our Creator. Anything that tends to suggest that has as its origin Satan's lie, all the way to Genesis chapter 3, his first lie, which was to create doubt. Yea, hath God said that? And then direct denial. Ye shall not surely die, he tells Adam, which of course was a lie. And you know, it's interesting, the other idea that Satan would like you to believe is that there are many paths to God. And Jesus talked about that. He says, broad is the way, and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, Jesus said. Narrow is the gate that leads to salvation. And so we need, if you're going through a gate that's very popular and lots of people are joining you, be careful. You probably have the wrong gate.